NetCredit is here to say yes to a personal loan or line of credit when other lenders say no. Apply in minutes and get a decision as soon as the same day. Loans offered by NetCredit or lending partner banks and serviced by NetCredit. Application subject to review and approval. Learn more at netcredit.com/partner. NetCredit. Credit to the people.
Hey, Mama, you don't have time to be messing around endlessly scrolling to find a caregiver for your child. Let me clue you into my trick to save time and my sanity when finding a sitter. SitterCity.com. SitterCity knows what they're doing. They've been helping busy parents find the perfect sitter for over 20 years. While other sites overwhelm you by throwing hundreds of random profiles your way, SitterCity matches you with caregivers who actually fit your needs. No endless scrolling, no guesswork. I love that all caregivers undergo ID verification. They have background checks, specialized qualifications, and real parent reviews to know if they showed up on time or really know how to handle my sassy toddler. And if I need help, I can talk to a real live human, not a robot, with SitterCity's delightful team. You know, my employer pays for me to get SitterCity completely free as part of my benefits. Yours could too. SitterCity is my go-to for a smarter, simpler way to find reliable, trustworthy care. Don't wait. Go to SitterCity.com/XX and get the help you need.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast. Join us every week for fascinating tales of rock art, adventure, and archaeology. Find our contact info in the show notes and send us your suggestions.
Well, welcome all you podcasters out there on the Archaeology Podcast Network. This is Dr. Alan Garfinkel with episode 142 of your Rock Art Podcast. We're blessed and honored to have a gentleman who's one of the great and influential and scholarly of our bunch, but from a place we haven't done a lot of podcasting. That's often Australia and also associated with Africa as well. Dr. Smith, are you with us?
I am. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks, Alan.
Yes. So we always kick this off, and you've heard this before at other podcasts, in that we have, in turn, I asked the question, how'd you ever get involved with the study of rock art and your passion for this particular discipline?
Yeah, well, the rock art journey for me has been a long one. So when I was thinking of going to university, it's a tradition in England to take a year out before you start university. My family have a long history of relationship with Africa, where half the family went out and lived in Africa and half stayed in England. So I grew up in England, but I was sent out to assist on one of my uncle's farms in what was then, no, it was Zimbabwe by then. And I started to get fascinated. On his farm, just behind the house, there's all this amazing Bushman rock art, full of spiritual meaning. You get a sort of a glimpse into the Bushman mind. And a lot of people have worked on Bushman rock art, but I then went up to work on a tobacco farm in Malawi, which is about, so people who don't know Southern Africa, Zimbabwe is kind of down at the bottom. And I went up onto a tobacco farm right in the middle, like literally if you stuck a pin in the middle of Africa, you hit a country called Malawi. And I went up for 6 months to work up there and started to see a whole bunch of art in Malawi that was completely different. So the Bushman rock art is very famous. It's full of pictures of very beautifully painted, brush painted animals and humans, and lots of people have worked on it. But I got up to Malawi and it's all finger painted geometric rock art. And I was like, whoa, this is so cool, so different. And no one had ever worked on it. And this old priest who was in his 70s, a Catholic priest, walked me around to more than 100 sites. And I was like, just blown away. And so I thought, God, this has got to be a study. And so literally from the age of, what was I, it would be 17, I was thinking, this is going to be my PhD. And so literally I went straight to PhD on this stuff, having gone through a degree, and my whole life was kind of hooked by rock art.
Where did you go to school?
So I was at Cambridge University, is where I did my PhD in England. I was really lucky because there's a specialist there on African archaeology who himself had worked on Zambian rock art, which is the country next door. So he was one of the few people that knew about this art, although no one had particularly worked on it in Malawi before.
Well, that's exciting. So then after you did your PhD, what happened next?
Yeah, so having got a PhD on one of the most obscure rock art traditions in the world, the challenge after, I think everyone would face this, you finish your studies, what on earth do you do next? I was incredibly lucky in that one of the people that deeply inspired me, I think probably one of the most inspiring people working on rock art ever, is a man by the name of Professor David Lewis Williams, whose work I know. And, what really inspired me about his work is that there's so many people around the world who are they're looking at rock art, they're doing amazing recording work, but when it comes to telling you about meaning and motivation, why, that's the sort of $6 million question. Why did people make this art? What does it mean? He's one of the few people that has taken a rock art tradition that we knew almost nothing about and cracked the code, where you can go to any rock art site now in South Africa and even in Zimbabwe and actually read the meaning of many of those panels. He's opened the book basically, and you can read them. And that seemed to me the greatest challenge for many other rock art traditions in the world at the time, to get behind just saying how old is it, what was it made of, and to get into the minds of people who made it and to be able to read it in the way that someone who was living at the time of the maker might have interpreted that art. And so for me, I was incredibly lucky. David Lewis Williams offered me a postdoc, and then I became the director of the institute he set up, the Rock Art Research Institute in South Africa, which is the largest specialist rock art organization in the world. And I spent a happy 16 years there doing amazing work, setting up a national museum of rock art, working with communities all over Africa to record and protect their rock art.
How exciting. So it sounds like what's interesting, Ben, is that one of the things you bring up, which is near and dear to my heart, and here in the States is very different, and that is rock art studies are an ugly stepchild here in America, and we really don't get the gravitas or the significance of the other elements and subfields of archaeology. And when we're talking about the work you do in Africa and also in Australia, the philosophy and base and perspective on this particular domain is very different. And it's nice to hear you saying those things about David Lewis Williams, because here, as I've mentioned on the podcast, when I've given presentations at scientific meetings, some of the greats and near greats for the States here say, well, it's only rock art, Alan, and you can say whatever you want to say.
That is the problem. So there have been too many people working with rock art who do it sort of in the academic domain. If you're going to be taken seriously, you've got to do rigorous research. There has been this temptation for some reason that you don't get in other strands of archaeology, for people just to do what, to go back to David Lewis Williams, called gaze and guess. That you feel that the longer you gaze at the rock art, the better your guess. And that's simply not the case.
Gaze and guess, I like it.
Gaze and guess. And that is one of the main reasons, I think, why other archaeologists don't take rock art research seriously, because they believe that most people are simply gazing and guessing. But good rock art research is not gaze and guess at all. Good rock art research will involve meticulous recording, where you're looking at all of the fine details in the imagery, doing a bunch of technical analysis, things like dating work, which is becoming much more widespread and possible, particularly with rock paintings. But then the key part, how you analyze those images. We're lucky in that 90% of the world, there is some form of ethnography that you can bring to bear on the rock art. And then the challenge is doing that careful tie-up where you're using the ethnography to understand the cognitive system, the belief system of the people that made it, and then reading the rock art in that system, so that you're not imposing your own Western mindset on the art, but trying to read it in terms of an indigenous view of that art. And that's challenging.
Very much so.
But in many parts of the world, it is possible.
It is very possible.
As your own work shows, we have enough information recorded, or either from people living today, but most often that was recorded in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, where you start to get little insights. And as those little doors open, you start to realize, hang on, that's why that's there. That's why that's there. And all of these things start to open up. When it's just single, I think it's all about shamanism.
But there is a strand beginning in America, not as active as you might imagine, where rock art researchers are now partnering with indigenous people in terms of the interpretation, analysis, research, etc., documentation, and conservation. And that is a rather novel and new thing for the United States or America to actually participate or represent and involve the actual native people in this exercise. And that's something that has been done in other parts of the world, but not as actively in the United States as we would have liked. And so I am finding that those that are engaged in such pursuits have done some of the best scholarly research, and had some of the most inspiring discoveries. Do you find that or no?
Well, of course. I mean, working with indigenous people is absolutely essential. It is their art. It's their culture. They're going to be much closer to it than we are. But one shouldn't forget as well that some of this art was made 10, 15, 20,000 years ago. And so, indigenous knowledge now will not have been the same as indigenous knowledge 15,000, 20,000 years ago. Certainly it's closer than Western knowledge, but there will have been change. And so that's where the archaeologist can be really useful and start to sift between simply reading modern knowledge into 10,000-year-old art. The archaeologist has those tools for saying, look, I think that aspect of your knowledge was working at the time because I can see A, B, and C in the art, but that aspect that you're talking about doesn't seem to be there. So that part of your knowledge has developed since that time. So what is most, when you're working with indigenous communities, they kind of really enjoy this as well, to get a sense of what parts are ancient. So there will be some stories that are incredibly ancient, like here in Australia, the rainbow serpent story, and that you can read that back in the art at least 10,000 years. But then there will be other stories that are not so ancient. And what rock art allows you to do is to see that and to see how knowledge has changed. All knowledge systems change, not just the Western system. We sometimes imagine that these other systems are fossilized in time, but absolutely not the case. All the world knowledge systems have developed and been vibrant and changing. And rock art allows us that mechanism to chart those changes, and that's what's exciting. So you need this mixture of archaeological knowledge and expertise and analytical skill, plus the indigenous knowledge.
One of the things that come up in my research and that I find interesting is when I run up against a particular rock art site and archaeological site, it's difficult, and there's really little in the way of ethnology. I try to go to comparative forage or theology throughout the world and look for analogs and try to tease out something salient that would make some sense in light of the material culture that I see and the imagery that has been preserved. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what we would call analogy and what is appropriate analogy. When you're working with meaning in rock art, there will be multiple levels of meaning, inevitably. And we know this from working with Aboriginal communities today, that there'll be, and the groups that I work with in Africa, there'll be one level which is kind of a public level. And then there will be deeper levels of meaning. When you're working with comparative ethnography, you often get only to that very top level, the overall level. So you might be able to say, for example, I can see that this rock art is associated with initiation or vision questing, but you're probably not going to get to that deeper meaning that you would then need locally specific ethnography for.
Right. Let's hold that thought because we're getting deeper, and we'll cut this segment off and pick it up in the next. See you in the flip-flop, gang.
NetCredit is here to say yes to a personal loan or line of credit when other lenders say no. Apply in minutes and get a decision as soon as the same day. Loans offered by NetCredit or lending partner banks and serviced by NetCredit. Application subject to review and approval. Learn more at netcredit.com/partners. NetCredit. Credit to the people.
Tired of scrolling through endless sitter profiles on other sites only to get ghosted? For over 20 years, Sitter City has been the go-to resource for parents who want a more personalized, reliable way to find trustworthy sitters and nannies. While other sites flood you with options, Sitter City focuses on bringing you high-quality matches that are the right fit for your family every time. With SitterCity.com, you can find full-time, part-time, or occasional care that meets your specific needs. Every caregiver is ID verified, and profiles include real parent reviews, background checks, and specialized experience, so you can spend less time searching and more time doing what matters most. spending time with your family. And did you know that many employers include Sittercity as part of their benefits package? In a few clicks, find out if you can get Sittercity free. Getting started has never been easier. Take the guesswork out of finding care so you can breathe easier knowing your kids are in good hands. Visit Sittercity.com today to get the care you need.
Welcome back. We're here with Dr. Benjamin, who's going to tell us about his active research in Central Africa. Kick it off, Ben.
Great. I'm going to take you back to Malawi and Zambia in the warm heart of Africa, where I first got inspired by rock art. The rock art there is really fascinating because I started working on the art in that area and realized it was incredibly diverse. That there's a whole bunch of images in white that are slapped on with the finger so that it's daub painted. And underneath them are this amazing red geometric tradition art. And I started to get intrigued as to this opened up really interesting questions as to why we had two very different rock art traditions made in different colors. So one was in red, one was in white. One was made by finger painting and the other one literally daubed on these massive, thick, pasted spread eagle designs. They look like a cow that has been splattered on a road. And they're huge and they're so crude but really impressive because they cover meters and meters of space.
Oh, wow.
And it started to tease out for me some of those classic archaeological conundrums. We've got two really different art traditions here. What does that mean? Is this two different purposes for rock art, or is this two different cultures, so two different peoples making rock art? And then as I started to get more, like I was doing my PhD by this point, and I started to do a more detailed technical analysis on the rock art. And I did something that was incredibly labor intensive. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, but it was actually really useful, where I looked at every single image type and I analyzed what other types of images were found. So I went through the whole, if you're imagining that these are animals, they're not always, in fact, in my case. But so I've got geometric. So I had like a round circle, a concentric circle. I had squares, I had lines, I had horizontal lines, vertical lines, etc., etc. And you find out which ones are found together. Do you get circles with squares? Do you get circles with triangles? And what started to come up was that, in fact, I wasn't dealing with just two traditions of art, but that there were four, that there were two sets of images that went together in the white art, and there were two entirely different sets of images that went together in the red art. So this became really interesting, because by this stage I was starting to think that the difference between the white and the red art was cultural, that one was a farmer tradition of art, the white art, and that the red art was the former, the older hunter-gatherer tradition art. And I could see this for a number of reasons. First of all, the white art is always on top of the red art. Secondly, the white art's quite fresh. The red is often faded. Also, there are still living traditions about the white art, where there are almost no living traditions about the red art. So I knew that there'd been some sort of continuity. And in this part of Africa, hunter-gatherers survived until, surprisingly, more recently, 300 or 400 years ago, the last hunter-gatherers in Malawi and Zambia. And they talk about them in really interesting, so that the tradition is full of these stories about the abattoir, the Batwa, who lived before. And they said that they were short people, very hairy. And there's really weird traditions that they had massive heads, and if they fell over, they couldn't get up again. So some of it is mythical, but some of it is actually based on fact. So we can see that they were short because excavations by Desmond Clark, the famous Californian archaeologist at Berkeley, found some skeleton materials from hunter-gatherers there, and they were very short. And he suggested that these were probably relatives of Central African pygmy peoples. And so that led me on a whole journey where I wanted to see who made this white art and why, because that clearly linked into modern farming groups. So these are not the hunter-gatherers, not the Batwa, but these are people who speak a Chewa language. And then I also went on that journey back to the hunter-gatherer past to try and trace these pygmies and see if I could rethink what a pygmy belief system might have looked like in this area that was now gone.
Fascinating.
I'll start by talking about the more recent art, the farmer art. So
yeah,
that's one of the things that I guess I'm known for, is that lots of people work with hunter-gatherer rock art around the world. There are far fewer people who work with pastoralist and farmer rock art. I'm not sure why. But farmer rock art can be just as fascinating. And in Malawi and Zambia, those white art traditions are linked in to some of the most important ceremonies of farming communities. So they're linked into the girls' initiation ceremony and the other. So I said that there were two traditions. One is linked into the girls' initiation ceremony and the other is linked into the boys' initiation ceremony. And that's why there are two. That's why they're separated. And the iconography of each is specific. And it's really interesting because you're painting, so these ceremonies are very secret, but you're painting rock art that's visible to everyone. It's massive on the walls. And so the rock art is really clever in that when you look at it, images, you see it looks like a leopard or a crocodile or a tortoise. And it just looks like images. And people all over the world, you think, oh, they're just painting what they eat. Of course, absolute nonsense. There's nothing to do with that. Each of those images, is in fact an icon that they use in the initiation ceremony and that will have a song attached to it. And there will be a secret teaching that is embedded in the song. And so the images themselves are basically aid memoirs. They're there to help you to remember the teaching. But if you look at the image itself, you can't see the meaning. You have to know the song and you have to know the secret teaching to understand. So the rock art can be public, even though that the information it contains is some of the most secret information in that society. And so that was one of the challenges for me. So I was initiated into the boys' initiation, and as a man, that's not an issue. And so I could get into the inner secrets and really understand exactly what each image meant. There are some things that I'm allowed to talk about, some things that I'm not, because they are secret, so I'm bonded into that secrecy. But for me, the biggest challenge was the girls' art, which obviously I couldn't get into. And so I was incredibly lucky in that I found a willing PhD student, in fact, from Mexico of all places, who was willing to go through the girls' initiation and penetrate the inner secrecy of that tradition. And her name is Leslie Zubieta, and one of my best PhD students wrote an absolutely fabulous book on this as well. And so both those traditions now we understand in quite a lot of detail. It's a very good example of how you can work with indigenous communities, in this case Chewa-speaking communities. They understand some things very clearly today, but other things they don't. And you can use that rock art to look at the history of their initiation ceremony going back some 1,000 or more years. So it's a classic case of, I guess, doing what Lewis Williams did, but for a farmer community in this case, of cracking the code of two really previously enigmatic rock art traditions.
The men's imagery versus the women's imagery. Can you give us some details of the representational element or the abstract elements that were correlated with those sexes or genders?
Yeah, sure. So in this case, and it will be specific to the Chewa, so in this case, the men's art was, so the men are in charge of a dance called the Nyao dance. And in the past, it's almost been called a secret society. And men get bonded into this secret society when they're initiated. So I'm a member of that secret society. And that secret society evolves around masking. So Central Africa is where all the famous masks from Africa come. And Nyao is one of these masked societies. And so as a boy, you will, in a dream, receive a calling as to which mask you should dance. And that might change in your life. So you might be called to make a new mask. And that mask can be a human figure or an animal figure. The animal figures have fixed and older meanings. The human figures are very vibrant and dynamic. So you could dance the Pope, for example, or you could dance the president, or you could dance someone who has AIDS. And the purpose of the dance is to teach people about bad behavior and what bad behavior, so that bad behavior in Africa doesn't just affect you, but bad behavior brings the wrath of the ancestors and the spirits and will bring terrible things to the whole village. So you have a responsibility to behave properly as an adult. And the Nyao figures are there to teach you that. So one of the great ones, so that some of the old masks still exist. So, for example, they have a King George mask, which was from the time when Malawi was a British colony, and it ridicules. So the king comes out in his sort of pompous glory, collecting money from everyone, which he then eats and takes away. And it was ridiculing the colonial officers who come around every few months collecting money from everyone in what they had a hut tax. Everyone with a hut had to pay a tax, and all this money disappears and no one ever saw any good of it. And they were contrasting this with their local chief, who also used to collect money. But the point of the local
Yeah.
money, and what he would use that money for, so that when they had a harvest, he would buy in all the harvest from people. And so the local chief had these massive granaries, and that's what the community money was used for, making the granaries, keeping the granaries. And whenever there was a drought, the chief would then distribute all of these things to the people. So
Amazing.
that's what you're meant to do when you collect taxes and you use them for the benefit of ordinary people. The colonial service didn't appear to do that, and therefore they were ridiculed through Nyao. So Nyao is this amazing democratic force that reminds people of what you're supposed to be doing. And sometimes when I live in Australia, I do think that we'd be better with a Nyao here. Sometimes we need something like this to hold our politicians,
Yes, absolutely.
particularly the multinational corporations, to account.
Yes. So then under those white paintings are the red foragers, the hunter-gatherers. What did you learn about them?
Yeah, so for me, this was the sort of the goosebump moment. So under that art is this older art of these Batwa, whoever these Batwa were, these short people, these hairy people, who the Che would describe that they were troublesome, they would raid your cattle, they were dangerous people. You needed to keep away from them. And we can see this in the archaeology. You can see in the sort of the hunter-gatherer archaeology gets into more and more remote places as you come into the farming period. So these people were slowly pushed into the mountainous areas, into the forests. And the archaeology is quite rich. And so I started working with their art. So the majority of their art is just geometric designs, very often circles, concentric circles, rayed circles, relatively small, most of them about the size of your hand, and painted just massed. So you get like 1,000 of these paintings on a panel. It's just stunning. Where it's well preserved, sometimes there will be little white ornamentation around, but red is the dominant color. And in a very few places you get handprints, but they're really rare. And when you get the handprints, they're small. So you can see that this was a short-statured people. And the skeletal remains, as I said before, show us that these were small-statured people. So I started to think there's no Batwa around. There's no one that really remembers what this art was about. But there were a few modern traditions about some of these sites. And so I started to record those. For example, there was one site that I went to that had this really strange hole in it. So it's all this geometric rock art, and in the middle of one of these circles is a hole that literally goes in the rock, and you can see people have stuck things in there because it's really smooth. And I started to ask people, why are people going here? What rituals are they doing in this site? They said, that's a women's site. A women's site. So why do women go there? So even today, when women are not able to have children, when they're struggling to have children, they go and they sleep in that site and they do certain secret things. And so there's some belief, an ongoing belief, that the rock art is related to girls' fertility and that it can affect girls' fertility.
Let's stop there. We don't want to give them the whole present yet. See you on the flip-flop, gang. Welcome back, gang. You're on the third segment of the Rock Art Podcast, episode 142. We're blessed and honored to have Dr. Benjamin Smith, who's talking about his passion for Central Africa rock art. Kick it off, Benjamin.
Yeah, so I left you in the shelter where girls were going for fertility. And I was just about to tell you that there are a couple of other shelters, in fact, quite a lot of shelters, where people interpret the rock art as depicting suns and clouds and things like that. And they will still go today to do their rainmaking ceremonies. So there's one, for example, where they take cow dung and they smear it. When there's a really bad drought, they will smear it on these sun images in the rock art, and they believe that will then help to bring rain. That's clearly not an original use of the site, because if that had happened in hunter-gatherer times, the art wouldn't exist. But there are some residual memories that the rock art is to do with weather divination, particularly rainmaking, and fertility divination. So that led me to, if this rock art was made by people who are more like the pygmies of Central Africa than the Bushmen of Southern Africa. So the Bushmen of Southern Africa are shamanistic, and their rituals revolve around trance dances. The pygmies have a really different belief system. So they live in a forest area, and they also divide their main rituals by men and women. The men are charged with looking after the spirits and the spirit of the forest, and they have this amazing ceremony called the Malimo ceremony, which happens at night, and you sing long into the night, and these songs go on literally through the night until you're in an altered state, and they're singing to the forest. And the men's job is to keep the forest awake and happy, and when the forest's awake and happy, everyone's good and all problems are resolved. The women, however, are in charge with fertility, and their main ceremony, which amongst the Mbuti pygmies is called Elima, is the girls' initiation ceremony, where they ensure the fertility not just of girls, but particularly of humans. But they're charged as well with seeing the increase of animal forms as well. So I started wondering if that's what we had in the Ark. So remember I said that there were two red traditions. And I started to wonder, so we've got a man and a woman's tradition in the farmer period. Could it be that this is one of the few places in the world where we have a man and a woman's tradition in the hunter-gatherer period as well? That would be really unusual. But I started to believe, and that's what I argued in my PhD thesis many years ago, and I've come along after many years of research to realize that I'm right, that this is in fact the case. So that red geometric art is the hunter-gatherer women's art that is connected to fertility and weather divination. And then there's another red art which actually has got some really strange, these weird animals with these huge stomachs, virtually no head, virtually no legs, a little tiny tail, but this big belly. And this is the men's art. And so my current project is to write all this up as a popular book. So I'm hoping, one of the reasons for coming onto this podcast is
oh my word.
So I'm on a 1-year sabbatical. Where my task is to write this up as an amazing book. And it's a fascinating tale, fascinating art. I'm sure no one that is listening to this podcast has ever thought or heard of Malawian or Zambian rock art, but it's an icon of the world. It goes back to the Pygmies, one of the first groups of humans. So the Pygmies and the Bushmen are two of the oldest groups in human genetic history. They split off from each other more than 70,000 years ago, and they lie right at the root of the human genetic chain. And they have quite different belief systems. And so when you're looking at Bushman religion and Pygmy religion, you're looking right back at what is the modern equivalent of the origins of religious thought.
Religion. So let me ask you this. The Pygmies, I think, would have what I might call, and other people have called, a pre-shamanic expression of religion. Am I correct?
You are. That people have suggested that, and that's what really interested me.
That's what interests me as well, because I'm dealing with that issue right now. Yeah, that's fabulously interesting to me, and I know that there's a lot of pushback on that when others have suggested that there was such an expression that would be more ancient than shamanism, that there is a pre-shamanic sort of basal level of other cultic elements. But
the latest kind of research looking at the origins of religion, going back about 10 years, has started to argue that shamanism's been very widespread amongst hunter-gatherer societies, at least for the last 10, 15, maybe 20,000 years. But before that, there might have been a pre-shamanic phase, and that a few signifiers of this, a few residual elements of this can be seen, that there are some communities that don't have those shamanistic beliefs. And the Pygmies are one of the most famous examples.
Fantastic. This has been a remarkable discussion. Why don't you kick it off with your last thing that you wanted to advertise about the collection and archival digital management of rock art
so
sites?
Part of the work that I do, working with these amazing traditions around the world, including Australian rock art, one of the big challenges we face is that people have been recording these sites for 100 odd years. And a lot of these sites are being seriously damaged by modern development, by people building houses, cutting up rocks for resource extraction, people touching, graffitiing, damaging the art. A lot of those early images that we have from the 1900s record the rock art in a much better state than we can see it today. And to see some of these fine details that are absolutely critical for interpreting the rock art, some of those old images are absolutely vital. You can't see those fine details today. So for the last 25 years, I've been working to digitize world rock art. I set up Africa's first rock art digitization center, and we digitized over 340,000 rock art images from across the continent, and that now sits in an amazing digital archive at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. I'm now at the University of Western Australia in Australia. I've set up another digital archive here with absolutely world-class, the best equipment in the world for digitizing slides, old photographs. We can even do those kind of glass negatives, the lantern slides. We can digitize anything to the highest possible quality. And we've also got an amazing system set up where we can display all of the digitized images and make them public. And so what I'm now looking for is really major collections of old recordings of rock art that people will allow us to digitize here. We can digitize them potentially for free for you, but in return, you need to allow us to make them available through our digital portal so that you can still keep reproduction rights and those kinds of things on them, but they need to be visible so that there's no point in us spending a lot of university money digitizing rock art collections if no one's going to be able to see them, or if someone wants to make money out of them. We're willing to do it for free if people are willing to share them with the world, and there are a lot of people willing to do that, so that these will then be available for bona fide scientific research, but obviously not for commercial exploitation. And so my call out to your listeners is, have you got an amazing collection of old rock art images? Would you be willing to allow us to digitize them? If so, please get in touch. I'd love to help.
How would they get in touch with you, Ben?
You'll find my details on the internet. So it's Benjamin Smith at the University of Western Australia. You'll find me on pretty much every platform, and I look forward to hearing from you.
How many folks do you have working at the facility?
So we have a staff of 5, and they work flat out all week. We have a bunch of different stations. So we have a film station that it's got the same piece of equipment that Disney used to digitize all of its early films. So it's a really high quality piece of equipment. We can also do old video. We can do VHS, Betamax, all those old professional tapes, all of those old tapes that you used to have in handhold tape video. Plus we have 2 stations, one that's set up particularly for slides and negatives, and the other one that's set up for paper copies, old tracings and those kind of things. But we can do a bunch. We don't only do rock art. We do other collections as well. But as a rock art person, and I'm running the lab, it's really great if we can use it to support the rock art community.
And you said that's generally available for other researchers and the general public to see these images?
Yes, we've just set up our online portal, and okay. I've just put the first rock art collection into it. But what we haven't done yet, we haven't sorted that collection. So the images are available, but they're not yet sorted. The portal is called UWA Collected. So UWA is the name of my university, University of Western Australia, UWA Collected. And if you go onto that portal and look at the Peter Genge collection, this is a collection of Zimbabwean rock art. You'll see nearly 10,000 images. What we're currently doing, the big challenge, I've got a whole bunch of students working on it, is to get every image obviously then linked to a site, to create site records for over 1,000 rock art sites. But at the moment, it's a bunch of images. We're now in the process of doing that exciting sorting part. So you'll then be able to see them, see where they are in the landscape, see everything that we've got about that particular site, see how it's changed through time.
Fantastic. What a remarkable life you're having, Ben, and what a blast you must have on your rock art journey. I'm blessed and honored to have you on board, and I really appreciate you spending the time to share this wondrous expression with all of our listeners.
It's been my pleasure. Anyone who works with rock art, you're incredibly lucky. It's the best job in the world. And for any young students out there thinking of what am I going to do? Am I going to become a business person, a lawyer, or a medic? No, become a rock art researcher. That's the most exciting thing you can do. Get in touch with me. I would love to supervise you.
God bless you, Ben. Fantastic. See you on the flip-flop, gang.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. Find show notes and contact information at www.archpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends. The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.